Two men. One freezing night. One desperate for warmth, the other drowning in grief. Neither knew that a stolen jacket would connect them in the most heartbreaking way possible. Because sometimes theft isn't about taking something, it's about finding what was lost. And sometimes the person you think is your enemy is the only one who understands your pain. The rain in Seattle had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the streets into rivers and the alleyways into ice-cold traps for those with nowhere to go. Marcus Reed sat hunched beneath the I-5 overpass, his entire body shaking from cold that had seeped so deep into his bones he couldn't remember what warmth felt like anymore. 43 years old, but he looked 60. Vietnam veteran, no, Afghanistan veteran. His mind corrected itself through the fog of exhaustion. 15 years living on these streets. 15 years running from memories that refused to fade. His military jacket, the one thing he'd kept from his old life, had been stolen 2 weeks ago while he slept. Now he wore 3 layers of shirts, none of them enough. The temperature was dropping. The rain was turning to sleet. And Marcus knew that tonight might be the night his body finally gave up. If you believe in second chances, in the power of human connection, and in stories that remind us we're all more connected than we think, please take a moment to like this video, share it and subscribe to our channel. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because your support helps these stories reach the hearts that need them most. 6 blocks away, in a different world entirely, David Morrison sat in his BMW outside a restaurant he couldn't bring himself to enter. His business partners were inside, celebrating a deal that would make them all millionaires. But David couldn't celebrate. Not today. Not on November 14th. Because today marked 15 years since his son Daniel died in Afghanistan. 15 years since a uniformed officer knocked on his door and destroyed his entire world with 7 words. "We regret to inform you that your son." David's hand trembled as he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a photograph, the only one he carried everywhere. Daniel at 18, fresh-faced, proud in his army uniform, smiling that smile that could light up any room. David traced his finger over his son's face, tears he'd held back all day finally breaking free. He couldn't do this. Couldn't pretend to be happy. Couldn't sit in that restaurant and celebrate anything when his son was buried in Arlington National Cemetery. David started the car, drove aimlessly through the rain-soaked streets, and eventually pulled over in a park near Pioneer Square. He needed air. Needed to breathe. Needed to stop feeling like he was drowning. He stepped out into the freezing rain, leaving his expensive coat draped over the park bench while he walked to the edge of the water, letting the cold rain mix with his warm tears. That's when Marcus saw the jacket. Dark wool. Heavy. Expensive. Lying unattended on a bench just 20 feet away. His survival instincts screamed at him. Take it. Take it now. You need it to survive the night. Marcus glanced around. The man who'd left it stood by the water, his back turned, head down. Marcus moved quickly, silently, skills he'd learned in the military and perfected on the streets. His hand closed around the coat. It was still warm. He pulled it on, and for the first time in weeks, his body stopped shaking. Then he ran. He didn't see David turn around. Didn't see the man's face go pale with panic. Didn't hear him shout, "Wait, please. There's something in the pocket." But David chased him anyway, running through the rain, his dress shoes slipping on wet pavement. Not because of the jacket. Not because of the money in the wallet. Because of the photograph. The last picture of Daniel. The one he carried everywhere. The one he couldn't lose. "Stop. Please." David's voice cracked with desperation. Marcus ran faster, darting through alleys he knew by heart, his homeless instincts kicking in. He'd been chased before, by police, by angry shop owners, by people who saw him as nothing more than trash to be removed. He knew how to disappear. He finally stopped 3 blocks away, ducking into an abandoned doorway, gasping for breath. His heart hammered in his chest, not from the run, but from shame. He'd become this. A thief. A man who stole from others because he had nothing left of his own. Marcus searched the jacket pockets. A wallet, he'd return it, leave it somewhere to be found. He wasn't that far gone. Keys. A phone. And then, a photograph. Marcus pulled it out, and the world stopped spinning. The face staring back at him was young. 18, maybe 19. Army uniform. Bright smile. And Marcus knew that face. He knew those eyes. He knew that smile because he'd seen it fade. He'd watched that light go out. "No," Marcus whispered, his hands beginning to shake. "No, no, no." Before we continue, pause for just a moment. Comment below. Have you ever carried guilt from something you couldn't control? Have you ever run from a past that refused to let you go? Share your story. You're not alone. The photograph fell from Marcus's trembling fingers. His mind was no longer in Seattle. It was in Kandahar province, Afghanistan, 15 years ago. The sound of gunfire. The smell of smoke and blood. The weight of a dying boy in his arms. Private Daniel Morrison. 19 years old. 3 months into his deployment. Marcus had been his squad leader, a sergeant with 8 years of experience and a promise to every mother and father back home. "I'll bring your sons home safe." But he hadn't. The IED came out of nowhere. The ambush that followed was chaos. Marcus had grabbed Daniel, tried to carry him to safety. The boy was bleeding out, looking up at Marcus with terrified eyes, whispering, "Tell my dad. Tell him I tried to be brave. Tell him." Daniel never finished that sentence. He died in Marcus's arms before the medevac arrived. And Marcus, who survived without a scratch, came home to nothing. The guilt consumed him. The nightmares destroyed him. His wife left. His job disappeared. He started drinking. And eventually, he ended up here, on these streets, trying to disappear, trying to become nothing because maybe if he was nothing, the pain would stop. But the pain never stopped. And now, holding this photograph, Marcus realized the universe wasn't done with him yet. Footsteps echoed in the alley. David Morrison appeared at the entrance, soaked to the bone, exhausted, but determined. His eyes locked onto Marcus, onto the photograph in his hands. "That's my son," David said quietly, his voice breaking. "Please. You can keep the jacket. Keep everything. Just, please give me back my son's picture." Marcus looked up, and their eyes met. Two broken men. Two people drowning in the same grief from opposite sides of a tragedy neither could escape. "Daniel Morrison," Marcus whispered. "Private. First deployment. Died November 14, 2009. David froze. His face went white. How do you know his name?" Marcus's throat tightened. 15 years of silence, 15 years of running, and now the truth demanded to be spoken. "Because I was there. I was his squad leader. I was the one holding him when..." His voice cracked. "I'm the one who couldn't save him." The rain fell harder. The world seemed to hold its breath. David staggered backward, his hand reaching for the wall to steady himself. You're Sergeant Reed. Daniel wrote about you. In his letters. He said you were the best leader he'd ever known. He said you made him feel safe." Marcus shook his head violently, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I failed him. I couldn't. I wasn't fast enough. I tried to get him out, but..." "He died in your arms?" David interrupted, his voice barely a whisper. Marcus nodded, unable to speak. David's face crumpled. He walked forward slowly, and instead of anger, instead of blame, he did something Marcus never expected. He reached out and placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder. Then he didn't die alone. He didn't die afraid. He died with someone who cared about him. Marcus broke. 15 years of grief, 15 years of guilt, 15 years of believing he was a failure. It all came pouring out in sobs he couldn't control. And David, this stranger who had every right to hate him, wrapped his arms around him and held him while he fell apart. "I tried," Marcus gasped between sobs. "I swear I tried." "I know," David whispered. "I know you did." Daniel's last letter, he told me about the ambush. He said you carried him. He said you stayed with him. He said you were a hero. I'm not a hero. Look at me. I'm nothing. You're the last person who saw my son alive, David said firmly. You're the last person who held him. You're the last one he spoke to. You're not nothing. You're the man I've been searching for 15 years to thank. Marcus pulled back, confused, disbelieving. Thank. David nodded, tears streaming down his face. I never got to say goodbye. I never got to tell him I loved him one last time. But you did. You were there. And I've spent 15 years wondering if he was scared, if he was alone, if he suffered. And now I know. He wasn't alone. You were there. The two men stood in that alley as the rain poured down, no longer enemies, no longer strangers, but two souls connected by a loss so deep it had broken them both. He said something, Marcus whispered. At the end. He said, "Tell my dad I tried to be brave. Tell him." Marcus's voice broke. "I never got to finish my promise. I never told you." David's hand gripped Marcus's shoulder tighter. "You're telling me now. And that's enough. That's more than enough. If this story is touching your heart right now, please don't scroll past. Hit like, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that remind us what it means to be human. What happened next wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a movie ending. It was quieter than that. More real. David didn't walk away. He took Marcus to a hospital, made sure he was treated for hypothermia and malnutrition. He bought him new clothes. He helped him find a shelter. And over the following weeks, they talked. About Daniel. About war. About guilt and grief and how both of them had been drowning in it for 15 years. David learned that Marcus had PTSD so severe he couldn't hold a job. Marcus learned that David had been so consumed by grief he'd alienated everyone who loved him. And slowly, impossibly, they began to heal each other. Not because either of them had answers, but because sometimes healing doesn't come from answers, it comes from being seen. From being understood. From knowing you're not alone. 6 months later, Marcus stood in front of Arlington National Cemetery, sober for the first time in a decade, wearing a clean suit David had bought him, visiting Daniel's grave. David stood beside him, and together they honored the boy who had connected them. "Thank you for trying to save him," David said quietly. "Thank you for saving me," Marcus replied. The stolen jacket hung in David's closet now, cleaned and pressed. He never wore it again. But he never threw it away either. Because that jacket, that simple act of desperate theft on a freezing November night, had brought two broken men together and shown them both that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning to carry it together. If this story moved you, leave a comment telling us, what's one thing you've been carrying alone that you wish someone understood? Sometimes sharing our burdens is the first step toward healing. We're listening.